विग्रहा त्रिनयना माणिक्यमौली स्फुरत् तारानायकशेखरा स्मितमुखी मापीनवक्षोरुहा पाणिभ्यामलिपूर्णरत्नचषकम् रक्तोत्पलम् सौम्यां रत्नघटस्थरक्तचरणां ध्यायेत् परामम्बिकाम् सततज्वर विषमज्वर ग्रह नक्षत्र दोषाञ्चान्या हर हर काली सर सर गौरी गम विद्ये आले माले काले बन्धे भज भज विद्ये मख मख विद्ये नाशय नाशय पापम् हर हर दुःस्वप्नं विध्वंसय विध्वंसय
Namaste and a warm welcome to all our participants for the 25th day of the Global Festival of Yoga being organized by Indica Yoga. As you all know by now, Indica Yoga is a platform that offers inclusive and diverse forms of yoga that is authentic, immersive, and transformative. So we have been on the stream of exploring wellness and well-being from various perspectives within the larger domain of yoga. And today we have with us another expert who will be presenting before us, that is Professor Kiran Kumar K. Salagame. May I now request Professor Kiran Kumar to kindly come on the screen.
Namaste. Good morning to all of you who have assembled right in the morning foregoing your sleep to listen to this lecture.
Namaste, sir. Swagatam. So we have friends for whom it is morning now, for some it's noon, for some it's in the evening and the night. We just saw a message from someone from Colombia who has wished us. So we have people across the globe who have now joined us for this session.
Very nice. Very nice.
So thank you very much for accepting to be with us this morning, sir. And I would like to present sir formally. He has given us a very brief profile, but you'll get to know more about him as you hear him. Professor Kiran Kumar K. Salagame was trained as a clinical psychologist and served as a faculty in the Department of Studies in Psychology in the University of Mysore. He is focused on bringing together ancient Indian philosophical insights with those of modern psychology through theoretical and empirical studies. This is one area where contribution of Professor Kiran Kumar is highly valued, that how to integrate the Indian tradition, bring it to the modern psychology world, but also in an empirically acceptable manner. I think that is his unique contribution. And he's also been on number of boards and bodies. I'll just mention a few of them. He is an honorary professor of International Academy for Yoga Teacher Training and member Scientific Board International Society for Interdisciplinary Yoga Research in Belgrade, visiting professor and member Academic Council of Swami Vivekananda Yoga University, Bangalore, a fellow of the Indian Association of Clinical Psychologists, associate editor of Psychological Studies, in the editorial board member of the International Journal of Transpersonal Studies, Journal of Transpersonal Research, and Indian Journal of Positive Psychology. His publications include Psychology of Meditation, a Contextual Approach. This is one of his, a very important book that he has given us. And he's also written chapters for many texts, many textbooks, and also many books. And one of them is the Oxford Handbook of Happiness, where he has written a paper on well-being perspectives from Sanatana Dharma or Indian tradition. So these are his seminal contributions to the field of Indian psychology, yoga psychology, and psychology field at large. And he will be presenting before us on perspectives of well-being and perspectives from yoga and psychology. Yes, sir. So with this, I now request you to kindly take over and lead us.
Yeah. Thank you, Vinaya, for a nice introduction and welcome. Once again, namaste to all of you, because there are people from all over the world, so good morning may not be the appropriate term. What I propose to do before I start a formal lecture is take all the participants of this webinar through a brief meditation session. So I request all of you to, wherever you are sitting, to sit straight and close your eyes. And if you are having any uncomfortable position, then please arrange your sitting position. Sit back straight. May I request Anuradha, if she is around, listening to this session, to monitor, if necessary, the other participants. Otherwise, do you think you can monitor whether any assistance is required, or it's just okay?
Yes, it's okay. You can just conduct it the way you want it, and people across will be following your instructions, sir.
Okay. All right. Thank you. Thank you. Yeah. So all can sit a bit straight back. So and close your eyes. Bring your attention and awareness on your feet. And basically, this meditation session, which will last for about 10 to 15 minutes, is a process of taking your awareness systematically from one level to another level of your personality. And I am sure as yoga practitioners, all of you are already familiar with this type of a experience and exercise. But the purpose of my conducting this brief session is only to connect what I'm going to speak with the meditation process that I am guiding you through. And this is nothing very new or any novel technique that I have devised or any such thing. There is no such claim about that. So first, after sitting straight, closing the eyes, breathing very comfortably and normally, just be aware of your environment, your physical environment. You are listening to my voice, but besides that, you could be hearing other sounds, or you may be experiencing the warmth or cold of your physical environment, or any other sounds, whatever it is. Just be aware of that physical environment with all the stimulus around you. This is just for a minute or two till I ask you to move on to the next phase. So basically here, what you need to do is to be aware. So just be aware of your physical environment, just for a minute or two. I will give the instructions further. Now, slowly bring your awareness and attention to your feet and the ground underneath your feet. Feel your sole, feel your feet, your legs, your calf muscles, your knees, your thighs, hips, genital region, your lower abdomen, your chest, your back, your neck, your shoulder blades, your shoulders, your forearms, your hands, fingers, thumb, your face, your lips, your cheeks, your eyes, eyelids, eyebrow, forehead, vertex, back of the head, top of the head. Now, try to experience and be aware of your whole body from top to bottom in one go, from head to feet in one go. Be completely aware of the body and remain with that awareness for a minute or two till I ask you to move on further. Now, you have experienced your body. Bring your awareness and attention to your breathing. Observe your breathing, the prana flowing through the nostrils and slowly filling your body from bottom to top, as though you have kept a bucket or a vessel under a tap, and the water starts collecting from the bottom up and slowly and steady. So just observe your breathing process, whether it is rhythmic or arrhythmic, whether it's fast or slow, whether it is in continuous flow, like an oil poured into a vessel, or there are jerks in between. Observe the prana flowing in your body throughout your limbs, your hands, your legs, your stomach, your chest. Experience the flow of prana. Be aware of that. Now shift your awareness to your thought process. There may be a continuous stream of thoughts, or for some, it may be few thoughts, for others, it may be no thought. It all depends on individual differences, how much stressful we are, what is our personality, and many other factors. But whatever it is, just be aware of any feelings, any other fantasies or desires, or any attempt to solve any particular problem, whatever it may be. Just be aware of the thought process. Don't evaluate, don't judge, don't think it is right and wrong, good or bad. Just be aware of them. That's all. Don't do anything more. Now, become aware of the awarer. Who is aware? Who is aware of the environment? Who is aware of the body? Who is aware of the prana? Who is aware of the thought process? Be aware of that. Be aware of the awarer. Let everything be in your awareness. Now, I will count 10 to 1. Slowly. 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. All of you can slowly open the eyes. Some of you may feel you don't want to open the eyes. You want to remain sitting with the closed eyes and listen to the talk. You are free to do what is comfortable for you. Now, I will give sufficient time for question and answer in the end, and also for sharing your experiences. Now, what we are going to discuss about is about well-being. As Dr. Vinay Chandra has introduced me, my basic training is in clinical psychology. So most of you would be familiar who is a clinical psychologist. My training was to help disturbed people, to treat mentally disturbed people who are ill through psychological methods. So in psychology, naturally we have many methods of psychotherapy which are developed that tries to understand what is in the unconscious mind of a person and tries to bring that to the consciousness, to the awareness, and help him realize his conflicts or suppressed desires. That is one approach. That is called psychodynamic approach. The another one is to help a person to relearn what a person has already learned, because whatever that was learned has not helped the person. It is in some way the learning has become an excess or a deficit. So this approach is given by behaviorists, and it is a process of re-education. Then we have cognitive behavior approach, which tries to understand to what extent a person's thinking process is rational and in tune with reality, how much of it is irrational, which is guided by emotions and desires, which are not very realistic, over emotional. So changing, which determine our thinking, perception, etc., which is what we call cognitive behavior therapy. Then some people are not just comfortable being a normal, ordinary type who want to grow. As a matter of fact, every person wants to grow. But some people have more need to grow, and they are willing to sacrifice even their basic needs. So this is a growth-oriented approach, which is called humanistic psychology. Then we have a further advancement of the growth, where a person wants to spend more time in a state of awareness which goes beyond space and time, what we call transcendence. And a person wants to develop potentials which are not ordinary, available to everybody. So this is transpersonal approach and transpersonal oriented therapies, etc. When we think of Indian tradition, yoga particularly, it is connected more to transpersonal psychology. And that is where much of the exchange of ideas, development of theories, and everything is happening. Now, a recent development in the last 2 decades is a new sub-discipline called positive psychology. Now, what is positive psychology? It is a focus on what is happiness, what is contentment, what is ultimately well-being. Because some of the pioneering psychologists in our discipline thought that modern scientific psychology has spent too much time and effort and energy in examining only anxiety, depression, schizophrenia, and other mental disturbances. It has not paid attention, it has not investigated what is happiness, what is joy, what is well-being, what are the conditions which facilitate that, how to sustain it, and all these things. So, Professor Martin Seligman, Professor Mike Csikszentmihalyi were the 2 important persons, along with Professor Christopher Peterson, who tried to usher in a new sub-discipline called positive psychology. And since then, a lot has been done. Hundreds and thousands of papers have been published, hundreds of books have come. So positive psychology is trying to examine what is happiness and what is well-being. When we keep all these developments together, what we find is people have their own ideas of what well-being is, what gives them happiness, what makes them to enjoy something, with what they feel satisfied. And there are a host of factors which is actually contributing for that. It may be physical, it may be psychological, it may be social, and it may be spiritual. So, what is well-being? Different perspectives, different theories, different models are given. In positive psychology literature, you will find that there are two important concepts. One is hedonia, which means pleasure seeking. Another is eudaimonia, which means trying to find some meaning in life, to actualize one's potential, which is also called self-actualization. So initially, there was an argument that pleasure seeking is one kind of approach, trying to develop oneself and try to find meaning is another. And gradually, researchers have found that, the basic idea of what gives one pleasure remains the same, but how, in what one gets that can be different. The pursuits can be different, source can be different. Now, there is an argument that modern positive psychology has focused too much on only pleasure, and pain is not taken into account. Suffering is not taken into account. So some of the humanistic existentially oriented psychologists have been saying that we have to understand the meaning of suffering, we have to confront suffering also. And that is called positive psychology wave 2. So it is not only pleasure, it's also pain. We have to come to terms with both pleasure and pain in understanding what is well-being. Here is the connecting point or the bridge for modern positive psychology with our ancient Indian wisdom, which we in India have inherited for several thousands of years. And most of you interested in yoga, I am sure, are familiar with some basic ideas of our tradition. We know that whether it is Upanishads, whether it is Jainism, whether it is Buddhism, or many other traditions which emerged subsequently, there is one common point, that is how to end suffering, how to reach a state of well-being which is sustainable, which is everlasting. And if you take a close look at how our traditions have approached this particular issue, we see that the Vedas and the Upanishads take a positive note by speaking about Ananda. Ananda is considered as some kind of a highest possible state of well-being a human being can achieve. That is why, you are all familiar, many of the Swamis will have their name ending with Ananda, particularly the Swamis of Ramakrishna Order. They are all having different names, but which ends with Ananda. Then we had a great saint, Anandamayi Ma. Now we have another great saint, Mata Amrutanandamayi. So, and Taittiriya Upanishad gives a whole section, devotes a whole section called Anandavalli, where the meaning of Ananda is defined. And it says, hypothetically, imagine a youthful prince who has beautiful body, who is having all the riches. He is of an exceptional character of valor, and he has a wife and who is equally good in all merits. He has a whole wealth, a whole kingdom, a very material thing that possibly one can imagine, and keep that as one unit of human happiness. Eko Manushanandaha. And then the Upanishad goes on multiplying it exponentially 100 times and says Ananda of divinities or Devatas is 100 times more. Ananda of Gandharvas, who are angels beyond Devatas, that is 100 into 100 more. Then we have Deva Gandharva, 100 into 100 into 100 more. And like that, it increases exponentially what that Ananda is. And at one stage, it says, more than this Ananda is the Ananda of a Brahmin. Brahmin means not by caste, the one who is in the pursuit of Brahman, who is called Shrotriya. He has no desires at all. And his Ananda is much more, 100 times more than all these Anandas. Shrotriyasya akama hatasya. He is not bitten by desires. So finally, that is going to be what is ultimately called Brahmananda. You can consult Taittiriya Upanishad for this description. You see here how mathematically our rishis spoke about Ananda and put it of a highest order. And they said that Ananda comes to a person who is not bitten by any desires. So this is one perspective. Then, of course, Jainism spoke of conquering oneself, conquering and reaching a highest state which is equal to Godhood. And they spoke of minimizing and all kinds of desires, but achieving inner happiness. Then Buddha spoke about ending suffering. He went in search. Most of you know all these stories as Indians and even as other people across the globe. Buddha took the road of suffering, how to end suffering. And then the Bhagavad Gita has given in chapter 2 about Sthita Prajnasya Lakshana, where the first two slokas of Bhagavad Gita itself, describing Sthita Prajna Lakshana, speaks about how to balance both positive and negative and remain calm. So now you see that we have all these different approaches. So when you think of all this, in between, there is something. One is individual pleasure seeking, another that is hedonic, then going beyond the limitations, that is transcendental, and being a Sthita Prajna. In between, there is something about society, because we live in society. Now we are all meeting on the web because of COVID-19, and we know this pandemic has affected the whole world. So all societies are in trouble. How to come out of this? Collectively, what action we should take? What well-being we have to strive for? Is it a pursuit of individual happiness? Is it going to be too extreme? I am happy, that's fine. Let anything happen to others. We are saying there is something called collective well-being, towards which many people are contributing. Now, how that comes up? It comes up from a awareness where you don't consider yourself to be an isolated individual. You are a part of the universe. You are part of the totality. So that is called collective well-being. So basically, we can say well-being, a person may think in terms of as part of a society at large or as a part of the whole universe. Loka samasta sukhino bhavantu. Now I will stop what I am going to say, what I have been saying, and I will open up this for discussion, clarification, etc. Thank you very much for being with me for these minutes. Namaskar.
Thank you very much, sir, for sharing with us the different perspectives on well-being, and from a yogic perspective as well, from the texts like the Upanishads. So we have not yet started on many questions because people are still processing what you have shared with us. There's one important question, however, by Anil Kumarji, who's a very regular attendee of our program. So his very poignant question is, how do you end suffering? Sir, is it not the past karma which defines one's pain or inner pleasure? So how much of it is really in our hands?
Well, you see, when we think of all these things, if it is of past karma, how to end suffering, we have the methodology. We have Patanjali's Yoga Sutra. Yoga Sutra is not a theoretical book. Yoga Sutra is meant to be practiced in different stages. So, how we have to know what is my past karma, first of all. And where do you get that information from? How do I know? I, as a psychologist, I ask my clients, listen to their developmental history, try to give some tests, and try to understand what is in the unconscious, what has happened in the past. In behavior therapy language, I call antecedents. And then I will try to work upon that. But here is a situation where when you say past karma, we know that we are referring to something that happened in another life or another lives. So we have no way of exactly knowing what it is. Of course, modern days, some of the people are coming with past life regression therapy and such methods. I have not undergone a personal experience, so I don't say anything about it. But it is possible that some memories can float up. But what is important in all this, from my understanding, is this. Whatever you call past karma or whatever it is affecting through emotions. Because it is ultimately the emotions which are important, and negative emotions like anger, hatred, jealousy, Arishad Varga as we call it. So, Yama Niyama, which is meant to work upon that, for which asana, pranayama, dhyana are going to help, is the only way for that. Because you know, we are using this computer. I'm talking to you. We have a file, everything. And if I want to delete a file, if I delete the file, what will go is ultimately some energy. You know, the programmers have built in a sound. It will make a chirr sound, chirr, it will make. And finally, everything is in that energy level only what we are speaking of past karma. As long as that energy is associated with some negative thoughts, it is affecting us. So what we require to do is how to separate that energy. Energy is the same, whether it's positive or negative emotion. Energy is the same. It is a thought which is creating the problem. So practicing all the 8 limbs of yoga is ultimately the important thing. But again, there are individual differences. And depending upon that, we have to choose which procedure, which technique will help us to overcome that. It may happen using modern psychological techniques. We have something called corrective emotional experiencing procedures. We can use that. We can use laughter therapy, or we can use primal therapy, or we can practice something in the traditional way. Finally, what matters is how much of your baggage of negative emotions you are able to decrease. That is how one can say. Otherwise, we have no way of measuring, knowing what is our past karma. The other way is going to a spiritual master who can see through all that, who can tell you, like Aurobindo, or Mother, or Ramana, or Ramakrishna, or like.
So you have very interestingly preempted a question by Umang Agarwalji, who says that is there something like having multiple, for example, 5 positive experience to neutralize one negative experience in relationship or perception? Because you spoke of this emotional therapy, no? That how can you maybe, so he's saying that he's read about this in one book on positive psychology. So
Oh, yeah. See, these ratios and proportions are all, we cannot have a strict thing. These are all probabilities and averages. We, as far as human mind is concerned, we cannot have strict measurement like we measure a table or a chair or something from the grocery store. But the basic idea of trying to substitute a positive emotion with a negative emotion, like Maitri, Karuna, Upeksha, you know, those methods, procedures, those are important in the sense that we have to try to step back. Now I bring in why I taught the meditation. Dr. Anuradha, you might have already guessed that I was trying to take in the procedure from Annamaya Kosha to Pranamaya Kosha to Manomaya Kosha, Vijnanamaya Kosha, and then to Anandamaya Kosha. So, unless we develop the habit of stepping back and remain bit aware of our body, mind complex and the environment, it is not possible for us to change ourselves, to work on ourselves. So that is the most important thing. And once we develop a little of that, okay, that is what Yoga Chitta Vritti Nirodha is also about. So once we have some degree of self-awareness, then it is possible for us to, monitor our thought process, monitor our feelings, observe what we are doing, and then whether it is 5:1 or 10:1, all those ratios, I am aware of that. There is a lot of controversy about it. papers are written. So I am not going to that. But what I say is, if you are aware of yourself, every moment you can make a conscious choice as to what you do. Abraham Maslow, a famous humanistic psychologist, who also was responsible for transpersonal psychology, said there is a regressive choice and a progressive choice. If you, every second, every minute in life, you can make a progressive choice or a regressive choice. So negative emotions are like regressive choices. So you can choose to respond positively. You can, if you are angry, if you don't want to express your anger, at least you can remain silent. You need not get angry. You need not say anything. You may not be able to say anything positive, but at least you need not say anything negative. And that waiting itself will help you to overcome. That's how I think.
Yes, thank you very much for highlighting the importance of choice, the element of choice that we have. Because Viktor Frankl, very famously in his book Man's Search for Meaning, he has
Yes.
that most empowering line where he says that circumstance can take away from man all of your freedoms but the last, and that is your freedom to choose your attitude in any given circumstance. So
Yes.
positive and regressive, so the positive choice and the regressive choice that one makes, I think, is a very important key, and which can answer many questions that have come up. But there was just another question by Yamini ji, who wants to know a little more about the collective happiness you spoke about. And if I may just add my angle on that. So people are, no, not my angle in a sense, my own question on that. In today's context of the COVID, when we are concerned about our personal family well-being, and we need the well-being of the world also. We are tending to, there are people who are used to thinking about everybody, and they're saying that I cannot only pray for my family's well-being. So could you just shed some light on this collective happiness and individual happiness and the relationship between them?
Yes. You take how different countries, leaders are responding to this situation. For example, there are countries where they have left everything to be managed by the individuals, by themselves. So much so, in one country, in the United States, I read in the newspapers and media that in some state, one young man around 30 or 35, he threw a party saying, I am welcoming COVID-19. Come on. And most of the youngsters of his age participated in it, in the COVID-19 party, thinking that they are beating that. And finally, what happened is one person succumbed to COVID-19, and the last words he said to the nurse is, I think I made a mistake. Now, this is an example of stretching your individualism, your freedom, too much to another extreme. Okay, so some people, some leaders don't want to wear the mask. Okay, and this is one way of looking at it. But you also look at the other way. There are leaders in some country who periodically come on the screen and try to caution people, who look at every citizen of the country as my own family. We have the Prime Minister doing that here in India, taking care, periodically coming. So that is being collective. When you say lokas samastas sukhino bhavantu, you as a person, you are not only responsible for yourself, you are also responsible for the whole others. And the idea of clapping that we did for corona warriors, for example, and lighting the lamp, all this comes from the basic understanding in the Indian tradition of dharma. Dharma is not just individual dharma, it is samaja dharma. it is, we have Loka Kalyana. Okay? What Vivekananda said, Atmano Mokshartam Jagad Hitaya Cha. So that Jagad Hita is the collective well-being. That may be your small family, your neighborhood, your town, your village, your urban area, your country, finally, all other nations in the globe. And that's why we exported so much of medicine to so many countries. Hydrochloroquine went around to some more than 100 countries. That is because we have the tradition of thinking loka samasta sukhino bhavantu. I have given this distinction: hedonic well-being, collectivist well-being, transcendental well-being, in my paper Perspectives of Well-being in Indian Tradition. It is on my academia.edu website. It's available. I must have sent it also. Already I shared some papers. I may have sent it. It is there on some of my papers. Yeah.
Thank you. There's also another, I think this idea of Loka Samasta Sukhino Bhavantu, these constant prayers for collective well-being are very important while thinking of one's personal one as well. So we have another question by Dr. Jai Prakash Gupta ji from Sydney, again another very frequent attendee of the program, who's saying that while you were discussing the different types of Ananda, it wasn't so clear, but his question is that can we really have different types of Ananda if Satchidananda is nothingness, or are there small Ananda tasters for the seeker of the final reality?
No, there are no different type of Anandas. It is only according to the Indian tradition, Upanishads and Vedanta, that experience of Ananda is in you. So there is a question now in modern psychology also. Is happiness extrinsic or intrinsic? And many researchers are showing that happiness is intrinsic, not extrinsic. It does not depend on something outside. It is in you. It is a state. So Upanishads and everything, even Buddha, they are all saying that is within you, it's a state. And if you follow yoga, finally, being in Drashtu could be equivalent of that. Now, the Upanishad is only saying, trying to show you the difference between the Ananda which you get from that transcendental experience, which is inside, how much bigger it is from the Ananda which you get from all the material things. If you take the story of Nachiketa and Yama again, Yama asks him, he is willing to give him everything, but Nachiketa refuses that. So, that Ananda is ultimately a state of one's own self. There is no difference. And in Viveka Chudamani, Shankaracharya points out that it is like sun is always there, but it is clouded. And when the cloud moves away, the sun shines. Similarly, the external sources of happiness which we think are sources, it may be anything, is only a momentary trigger of that. It is like opening the slit of a camera when it captures. So it's open, you feel happy. Ice cream will make you feel that, but it is in you. So that is how it should be understood. It is not different type A, type B, type C Ananda. No. The experience is the same. And the state is within you. That is what is meant in that Ananda world. I'm not hearing you.
Thank you, sir. Sorry. So we have another question by Radha Raoji, who's actually in a sense, bringing out what was in our mind initially, where we spoke about your connection with Ramana Maharshi ji.
Mm.
So you have been a long time disciple of Ramana Maharshi's teachings, and you've also been a clinical psychologist at the same time. So her question is, will you throw some light on Ramana Maharshi's approach to clinical psychology? So how do you combine it as a clinical psychologist and yes.
See, when Ramana Maharshi was in his body and he was interacting, literally, clinical psychology was not there. So, so what I understand what you mean. See, he had seen everything from his own standpoint of Atma Gnana, because Ramana Maharshi got his self-realization experience instantly as a 16-year-old boy. So therefore, he went to that state in no time and got established in that ultimate state. So from his perspective, all the human problem, suffering, misery is because you don't know who really you are. That's basically what Upanishad also says. And we had a person who was authenticating it from his own experience. Okay. Now, how does he look? Therefore, for him, schizophrenia, major depression, obsessive compulsive disorder, drug addiction, that whatever it is, these are all what we clinical psychologists in psychiatry make a distinction using DSM classification, all that. But he was seeing that even normal people are in samsara, in suffering, right? So for him, it did not matter whether you are, suffering, diagnosed as a schizophrenic or not diagnosed as a schizophrenic. Whatever difficulty every person undergoes, that experience, one has to know oneself. So this was Ramana Maharshi's standpoint. But I can tell you from my offhand memory, which I am getting, there was a person who had committed lot of crimes in life, who had taken drugs or whatever it is. And he comes to Ramana Maharshi and he feels he is a sinner. But Ramana Maharshi says, you give all that to me, all those negative thoughts and feelings to me, and be clear about yourself. And he sees that that person gets transformed from feeling guilty, being an addict, being a sinner, being this and that. So here Ramana Maharshi had the capacity to literally even could experience his negative feelings, but he can absorb it. There are many such things if you read the biography. But as a therapist, when I see, if I have to give counseling and therapy, I may spend more sessions, come this day, come that day, I will use this technique, that, or I may say this, that and all. I will give you test, I will analyze your mind and all. But people who go and sit in front of Ramana Maharshi, after some time, all their queries are dissolved. They will come out refreshed, because he was operating at a level where he could just transmit some spiritual energy and heal all the wounds of the people. And at one point he says, you have the energy and you can direct that at will. I don't remember the text where it is written, but it is etched in my mind. He says that energy you have access, and when you get it, you can direct at will. So he could do that. He used to do that. He would look at somebody straight like this, and transmit the energy, as some people call it Diksha or something like that. But whatever it is, he was more a therapist. See, yesterday, Dr. Bhavanani said, there is salutogenesis, there is pathogenesis. Yoga Chikitsa is there, Yogopathy is there. And he was saying we have to follow Yoga Chikitsa. Okay, so Raman Maharshi was not bothered about pathology. He was sitting there and closing the eyes or opening the eyes, he would transmit the energy and heal. He will send them. So therefore, we cannot compare modern psychology, clinical psychology with his. But if we compare, I have to say he was healing through energy. That's how I can put it.
Thank you, sir. I was also could connect the word chikitsa with what you've said, because coming from a Sanskrit background, these words are very insightful. So chikitsa actually means to look for the right consciousness. It's not about medication. So how do you look for the right consciousness when you are in dis-ease and come back? Very interesting. We had another question by, not a question, a request by Patricia Mayer, who's a very dear friend from Milan. And she's woken up extremely early to be part of your session. So she's saying that, what is your personal experience with Ramana Maharshi? As a person, as a clinical psychologist, how has Ramana Maharshi impacted your life? And research.
Okay, I will try to make it as brief as I can. See, I grew up looking around Raman Maharshi's picture in my home because my eldest brother had the darshan of Raman Maharshi twice. Okay, so I knew all about Raman Maharshi. His, and he used to chant Karturagnaya Prapyate Phalam and all that. So we were aware of his presence and existence there in Tiruvannamalai. But I never got influenced in any way by all that physical exposure to his presence and being aware that he is there. When I was doing my doctoral degree on altered states of consciousness, I had occasions to meet people involved in sadhana, of various kinds. And in that course of time, one of my professors, while talking to him, he suggested that I should go and spend 2-3 days, in ashram. That is the first time I really thought of going. Otherwise, I had no idea of going there, this thing. And when I went there, it was early morning, 2 o'clock from Bangalore to Tiruvannamalai. It's just about 4 or 5 hours in the night. And, I slept in a place where they just gave me some place to sleep on the floor and with a mat because I had not booked any room, advance booking. So I felt some, some another being in contact with me in a physical way. So that's all I had. And the next morning, I took the room and went to the meditation hall, which is called Old Meditation Hall, and just meditated and had a beautiful experience where all my thoughts got cleared as if in one sweep, in one stroke. Everything was, wiped out and felt beautiful, some kind of a light coming from within. So that was the only experience I had. And subsequently, off and on, now and then, I used to go. I was not regular. But whenever I have gone there, I have felt deep silence, stillness. That also, at some stage, I didn't feel. I was talking to people about it. They said partially because there are too many visitors, and partially because you have got used to that. So either way, you may not feel, but keep continuing. So there is nothing more dramatic I have experienced. None of the altered states I have read and I have researched about. Nothing extraordinary or anything like that. But more and more I keep going, I feel more settled inward, more and more clarity about things, about emotions, about life and all. So that's all I can share. And as far as research is concerned, yes, I have to tell that while doing research, I always used to think about one thing. Raman Maharshi is a great saint. Ramakrishna Paramahamsa is a great saint. At that time, we had Maharshi Mahesh Yogi, transcendental meditation. Acharya Rajanish, who was also, very great master. Ananda Mahima. So I always used to think, all these people are great masters. Of course, Aurobindo was there. Mata, Amrita, all these. But why are they behaving differently? Why somebody sits in one place? Why somebody wants to go and change? Why somebody writes voluminously? What is happening to them? Once realized means they should be keeping quiet. Why are they not doing it? So as a young man, I was thinking like that. And then gradually I realized that, even though you become enlightened person, because you have come in this body and mind complex, you have something to do. And that something to do is your personality and individual difference. So whatever state you are within is different. All of them are maybe in the same state. But outwardly they function differently, doing different things because they have to do something different. Just like all of us have something to do. So that kind of gave me a clarity about understanding all these people following sadhana. Because I was interviewing people from Mahesh Yogi Center, Theosophical Society, Vivekananda Kendra, Brahma Kumaris. I was going and meeting so many people, So why all this? So some of those confusions got cleared, and that helped to think straight.
Thank you very much, sir, for giving us a personal and
Yeah.
your personal journey with Ramana Maharshi and your
Yeah.
work.
Yeah.
So we have a question by Suresh Ji Lohia Ji, who's saying that how can these concepts and approaches be applied to mental illnesses like schizophrenia? The team has tried medicines like CBT and then also therapies like CBT, yoga, meditation, etc. But they're unable to actualize or interest such persons who are stable with allopathic medicines. So he's a seeker from Irvine, USA.
Yeah. Okay. See, basically, schizophrenia is a state from a psychological point of view, is when your ego, which is supposed to be the executive center for all of our functioning, gets completely disturbed and falls apart. A neurotic person, an anxiety person, an obsessive compulsive person, they are all still having that ego function intact and trying to struggle. But here is something which has completely come apart. That is when the unconscious is flooding and the person is experiencing all kinds of things depending upon various degrees. Now the current therapies which exist in psychology, they are trying to put the ego back into strengthening the ego, or what we call reconstructive approach, where you have to develop the personality. Okay. And the psychoanalysis or bioenergetics and other types of therapies, many have been used for that. But you cannot use meditation, dhyana, for a schizophrenia directly, because it is basically already the mind is is not coherent. if you might have experience because you are a long time meditator, you know, when we sit in meditation, so many thoughts come. Unless we have that platform from which we can watch that, if we sink into that, we are as good as, you know, the only difference is you have a control factor. Otherwise, you may be throwing things around and behaving like a schizophrenic. So that regulating function, self-regulating function is what is most important. So that self-regulation can be slowly developed in two ways. One is you be with a schizophrenic as a compassionate partner and allow the person to pass through the whole of all that happens. Okay? It is called healing partnership. You be there as a support person and allow the person to do that. After some time, all the person will slowly get back to normalcy. This is called, you know, what is called schizophrenia as a healing process. Back in 1970s, one Seymour Epstein wrote 2 papers about it. That is one way, looking at it that way. The another way is trying to teach yoga, you know, physical yoga, asana, because body will slowly, you know, try to help you to concentrate, to get back to your state. Because when we want to do meditation, we ask people to sit straight back. It is also some kind of habit, some kind of muscular coordination which is required there. So through yoga and making a person through pranayama, it is possible to do. In NIMHANS, Bangalore, Dr. B.N. Gangadhar has established, is the director now, has established the Center for Yoga, and they have successfully tried yoga, some of the yogasana and other things on treating schizophrenia. So that may be, you have to look for National Institute of Mental Health and Neurosciences, Center for Yoga Studies. So please inform our friend from Irvine, let him look into the Google and look for Dr. B.N. Gangadhar's work.
Thank you, sir. What I'll do is I will now club 2 questions and I'll take 2 sets of those. So the first one is, when you talked about mental movements and all, so we have Ravindra Murthy who's saying, dear doctor, we recognize that thought mind is the source of the problem.
Huh.
I do believe that using mind again with another set of thoughts is likely to become another source of problem. However, thought comes, thought goes, but the background awareness that you are is always peaceful. Once we abide there, thoughts are not likely to have much impact on us. He would like your inputs on that. And another question, I can sort of relate another question to this by Asha Manjunathan ji, saying that, how do you analyze our calmness? Some basic examples. So if you'd like to address both these together.
Yeah. For the first question, I agree with the person who has made that comment. That is what I was trying to put all of the listeners and the viewers in that awareness in the brief 10-minute session, where I said, you know, remain in that awareness, who is aware. Ultimately, the purpose of all training of yoga is to remain in that awareness so that the thoughts will come and go and they will not affect us. So I don't know, amongst the many viewers here, some who are experienced might have experienced that awareness automatically, even in the 10 minutes. But for others, it will take more time. So it's a matter of individual difference. So I agree with him. And there is no question of one mind is substituting another, not that. It is cultivating that inner awareness, which is a witness, drashtu, whether you call it drashtu, whether you call it turiya, whether you call it by another name. Finally, there is an awareness, which is different from the mental process. So if we are able to discriminate the two and try to be more in that awareness, it's fine. Then other things will fall into place. As far as the second question about example, how do you see? Generally, we are agitated when some issues come up. So basically, in psychology, we have something called fight and flight reaction. So that was one of the theories of emotion. Whenever there is a dangerous situation, either we fight or run away from it. Okay. Now we have raga, dvesha, abhinivesha. So it is one of those things which is happening. Now, when for animals, the threat was from other animals. But we have grown as human beings. We don't have a physical threat. But we have always a threat for our ego. We are always concerned about our identity being shaken. And with what we identify, either it is biological, physical, psychological, or social aspects, which is called biopsychosocial identity. So we are always disturbed with our identity issues one or the other way in our social existence. And the typical way we function is we react. Reacting is through emotion. But a person, when he or she gets more and more self-aware, reactions will come down, response will increase. There is a difference between reacting and responding. Reacting is by habit, automatic. Responding is through conscious choice. One of the contemporary masters, Jaggi Vasudeva, he has often made the distinction and he has written about it in his biography. So you have to look into that. So responsiveness comes by, bringing in the consciousness between what the other person said or did and what my emotions immediately jumped. So in between, I bring a filter. And more and more you get into self-awareness, your tendency to jump at the sight of things here by listening to somebody hurting or whatever, that will slowly come down. Another thing is, you don't tend to react with fear and anxiety in many situations which are considered dangerous. Your tendency to immediately get, panic will come down. Here, of course, how much you are already vulnerable to anxiety because of your biological predisposition, like autonomic lability, overactivity of the sympathetic nervous system, and such things also matter. Somebody may do meditation for 25, 30 years, but if hardware is having some problem, then even if the software is good, there will be some kind of disturbance. So you need to know whether it's a hardware problem or a software problem. And if it is a hardware problem, you have to attend to that. You have to take medicine, whether it's Ayurveda or allopathy or whatever, hundreds of systems. You have to deal with hardware also. But if your hardware is right, then you have to improve your software. You have to change the subroutines. You have to write the new programs, improve yourself so that you respond, don't react.
Thank you very much, sir, for that lovely analogy, which I think many of us can relate to in today's digital world.
Yes.
Because there's a question which I'm sort of relating to what you just said. So one can work on one's own hardware and software, But we have a question by Sarika ji, and I'm using your analogy here. She says, I mean, the problem is what do you do about a faulty hardware and software with somebody else? How do you deal with it? I'll just put her question as she's asked it. So Sarika ji is saying, what is the approach that may be used to deal with people who are constantly negative, indulge in verbal, emotional abuse, given the greater incidence of such cases during the current COVID lockdown? And the same question was also reflected on by Philip Montaño Socaris, who's saying that how do you improve family relations in these times of quarantine when personalities are so different?
Well, yoga is not an answer for everything. Okay, it is not an answer for everything. But still, these are the times we need to take, if there is a constant negative environment around you, and if you can't leave that out, you can't just go away from that, which is a easier solution, and in many ways it is a sensible thing to do. Okay, but you may not be able to do that. In that case, you have to take that as your field for sadhana. Try to cultivate more of Maitri, Karuna, Upeksha, etc. Try to develop more of your tolerance, your compassion, try to do that, and try to put a mask as far as possible. Just as we put a mask to our mouth and nose, you have to put a psychological mask around you. You have to develop psychological mask, which stops the virus from others entering you. And you can develop it. It will be cultivated automatically. The only difference is you mentioned in the beginning about logotherapy of Viktor Frankl. So Frankl said there is an attitudinal value, there is an experiential value, and a creative value in any life circumstance. If some circumstances have to be experienced, grin and bear it, whatever it is. The other one is creative. You try to change the environment. The third one is take an attitudinal value. That means, okay, I can't do anything. This is how it is. So just accept it. So we have to see when to take the experiential value, when to take the creative value, and when to take the attitudinal value. Okay. I quote because I keep seeing nowadays these TV serials, I'm watching Sri Krishna. So I give an example, many of the viewers may be familiar. When Jarasandha went on coming to Mathura and attacking, Krishna, he wanted to kill 16, 17 times with his army. Finally, Krishna said, look, there's no point in, subjugating all the people of Mathura into this distress. It is not good. Let us shift, let us vacate Mathura, establish Dwaraka, another, place, and go away. So they simply went. Krishna didn't bother to fight again. He went away. So we have to take such extreme steps if that becomes inevitable. But we cannot always go away like that. Then we have to develop our own, sadhana. And in that, pranayama, asana will help. And, trying to develop Maitri, Karuna, Upeksha, and such qualities consciously will develop. Trying to be more responsive, not reactive, is the way. And all that requires you, become more inner aware and be a sthita prajna, ultimately. Okay? Sthitadihi muniruchyate. So you need to cultivate that, and that is what yoga is all about. Drashtu. So finally it all boils down to that.
Thank you very much, sir. And there's Ravindra Murthy ji who's just adding a quote from Ramana Maharshi ji, who said that you can cover your feet, but you cannot cover the whole world. So, as you said, come back to yourself ultimately. Thank you
Yeah.
very much, sir, for this real treat on different perspectives of well-being from the yoga tradition. I would just like to acknowledge our friends on Facebook also, who shared some lovely comments about about your session. So we have Rahi Santanamji, who in fact was also a presenter and one of the most regular promoters of this course. She's like one of the foremost ambassadors of wellness. We've conceived of this notion of an ambassador of wellness, and we really need to have more and more of such ambassadors of wellness, and who are not just practicing it for themselves, but who are actively promoting it in their respective networks. So Rahiji on Facebook is saying that what a beautiful practical session. Thank you very much. And these words have been reflected by many of our participants who've been greatly appreciative of what you have offered them in this morning and evening for the others in the other part of the world. So I would just like to request you to give some contact details or how people can reach out to your work. We had Dr. Jayaprakash Gupta who's saying that they'd love to read your thesis because that could help them probably understand about altered states of consciousness better. So I will go on to make the announcement, sir. Could I request you to kindly put your details on the chat box? Would that be possible for you?
You have my mail ID.
We can share that.
You can give that mail ID to anybody. I don't interact on WhatsApp, Facebook, and all because I will be prompt in replying to mails.
Wonderful, wonderful.
I will be very prompt. I will definitely reply, but I don't interact on WhatsApp and Facebook because it takes away all my time. So I have come out of many WhatsApp groups and I hardly see my Facebook account.
All right.
And I am not on any other social platforms, but I regularly check my mail. And my thesis is not published, but many of my papers are on the ResearchGate and academia.edu. It can be read. And I will be very happy to reply on email. I can write even long emails in reply. I have no problem. Other than that, I don't want, because it will take away a lot of my time. But I will be very happy to interact with people. You can give my email, kikusk@gmail.com. You can put it.
Vinaya has shared it, yes.
Oh, yes. It's fine. Oh,
Yes.
yes.
Thank you, sir. So what I'll do is I'll just move on to make the announcements for the rest of the day, and I'll come back to you for your message.
Okay.
A message you would like to leave the audience with. So
Yeah.
Srinivasi, may I request you to please put up the rest. So dear friends, we've had the good fortune of learning a little bit about Sunad when Padma Shri Umakant Gundecha ji had a session and Tarakini ji was in conversation with him. So this afternoon, we have a wonderful session by the Dhrupad team on Sunad, Dhrupad and the Upanishads. Sunad is a group of people from different backgrounds who have a love for Dhrupad, and they are combining their practice of Dhrupad with the teachings of the Upanishads. So we have a team of C.S. Balasubramanian ji, who is a freelance multi-instrumentalist, but by profession, IT man. And we have Tarakini ji, who is the founder director of Sunad herself. We met her before. And we also have in the team Rama Srinivasan ji, who's a former IT consultant and a Dhrupad vocalist as well, part of the team. And Shanti Subbaraman ji, who's an entrepreneur and IT consultant. So we are going to have a treat of listening to the work that this fantastic group is doing. So make sure that you are participating in that this afternoon. And in the evening, we have another group coming before us. This is a group that is being presented by the GPIW, Global Peace Initiative of Women, which is a collaborating organization. And Kiran Kumar sir spoke to us about dharma and its importance in ensuring our well-being and happiness. So the session that we have this evening is a dialogue on dharma, yoga, and economic well-being. The panel members are very eminent people in their own fields. We have Swami Atmarupananda, a very long time Swamiji of the Belur Mutt. Now he's a resident minister of the Vedanta Society of Greater Houston in the US. Manish Jainji is the founder of Swaraj University, who's doing some amazing work, including starting a jail university, which we will talk to you about. We have Prashant Singhji, who's the president of the Center for Innovation in Governance from the Rashtam School of Leadership, another fantastic institution that we'd love to present you with. And this is the Rishi Hood University. And then finally, we will have with us Dina Miriam, who spoke to us last evening. And she's the founder and key convener of the Global Peace Initiative of Women. So she'll be moderating the session, and I would also join her a little bit in that. So we have this dialogue coming up for you. Please stay with us. And I would just like to come back to Professor Kiran Kumar to share his words of wisdom with our participants and bring some light on how we can enhance our well-being in these difficult times as well. Thank you, sir.
I don't think I have reached a stage to give any prescriptions. We just have to be, thinking about all of us, because in whatever way, in whatever capacity we can do, we have to keep ourselves healthy and try to keep others healthy. That's all, so you wear the mask and also encourage others to wear the mask.
The literal and psychological one, the literal and figurative mask.
Yes. Yeah, that in the Doordarshan, you have that advertisement, where Akshay Kumar is wearing the mask and telling the other person, wear the mask and go and do your work, and encourages the other man. Like that. See, the problem is we have to implement to our life all that has been said in our tradition as much as possible. We are all human beings. We have our limitations, but we also have our strengths. So we have to adopt in life to grow yourself and to also help others to grow around you. That is Atmano Mokshartam Jagadhitaya. The point is, everything is in ancient Sanskrit. And people like you and Dr. Vinay Chandra and many of you who are Sanskrit scholars, my suggestion or appeal is this. You all have to translate many of those noble ideas in a practical way and communicate it to people. That is all to be done. If I am able to communicate in English some of the ideas, I am sure all of you Sanskrit scholars can do it better. The problem today is about communication. As long as Sanskrit tradition is held as something sacred to be kept away in a particular way, all the practical implication of what is said will not be communicated to the people at large. And that is all to be done. So finally, that's all. Wear the mask and help others to wear the mask. Thank you all the viewers. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, sir. I was just very tempted to say the mantra of well-being, which is, and I request everybody to join along who knows this mantra.
Shanti mantra.
Yes, the Shanti mantra. Yes. So
please go ahead.
Om सर्वे भवन्तु सुखिनः सर्वे सन्तु निरामयाः सर्वे भद्राणि पश्यन्तु मा कश्चित् दुःखभाग् भवेत् ॐ शान्ति शान्ति शान्तिः. So I just wanted to add that this mantra, while it is a prayer of well-being for everybody else, it has an embedded responsibility. As you're saying, may everybody be happy, there is a responsibility of being happy for oneself. And then you can ensure happiness everyone around you. For ensuring the physical disease-free nature of others, one has to, as a responsibility, be healthy. For ensuring that everybody sees good, one has to practice doing good oneself. And finally, for no one else to have sorrow, one has to practice not giving sorrow to anyone around oneself. And Om, peace, peace, peace. Thank you very much, sir. Our audience has loved your session, and we look forward to your continued association with Indica Yoga. Thank you.
Okay, it's my pleasure. Thanks for inviting. Oh, namaste.